Sarah had always dreamt of a perfect wedding. She imagined a day filled with love, laughter, and the warm embraces of family and friends. However, as she stood beside Michael at the altar, her heart sank a little with each harsh whisper she heard from Evelyn, her soon-to-be mother-in-law. Despite the beautiful setting in a small flower-decked church and the sun streaming through stained glass, Sarah felt a chill. Michael looked handsome in his black tuxedo, his smile bright and promising. But every time Sarah caught Evelyn's eye, she saw something cold and calculating. The older woman, dressed impeccably in a navy dress, handed out subtle but sharp critiques. A comment on Sarah's dress being too simple, a whisper about the choice of flowers being too common, and a pointed remark about the modest number of guests. Sarah tried to brush off the negativity. She told herself that it was just nerves or perhaps Evelyn's way of dealing with the emotion of the day. But as the reception began, it became harder to ignore. Evelyn dominated the conversations, steering them back to herself or Michael's accomplishments, barely acknowledging Sarah except to highlight what she perceived as faults or oversights. At the dinner table, Evelyn continued her subtle digs. "Michael, remember the Andersons' wedding last year? Now, that was a ceremony," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, implying that Sarah's arrangements paled in comparison. Sarah's attempts to contribute to the conversation were often cut short by Evelyn's sharp interjections. Even Michael didn't seem to notice the tension. When Sarah gently squeezed his hand under the table, seeking some reassurance, he simply smiled at her and turned to laugh at something his mother had said. This moment, which should have been the happiest of her life, felt overshadowed by the looming presence of her new mother-in-law. As the evening wore on, guests danced and celebrated, but Sarah felt increasingly isolated. Her friends and family tried to uplift her spirits, telling her not to mind Evelyn's remarks. "She's just set in her ways," her own mother whispered, giving her a comforting hug. Despite the reassurances, Sarah felt a growing unease about what her future in this family would look like. She had always known that marrying Michael meant being a part of his family, including his overbearing mother. However, she hadn't anticipated feeling like an outsider at her own wedding. As the party continued around her, Sarah found herself observing Michael and Evelyn. They shared a bond, clearly, one that Sarah feared she might never be a part of. She wondered if Michael understood how his mother's words affected her, or if he was too wrapped up in the joy of the day to see the pain it caused. Determined to not let these feelings spoil the day, Sarah decided to focus on the love she and Michael shared. They had come together out of love, and she hoped that in time, with patience and understanding, she could find her place in Michael's heart, strong enough to withstand any external pressures. But as she watched Evelyn laugh and direct Michael's attention once again, Sarah felt a resolve forming deep within her. She would need to be strong enough to face whatever challenges this new chapter in her life brought. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to bridge the gap with Evelyn, or at least come to an understanding for the sake of her and Michael's future together. After the wedding, Sarah and Michael began their life together in a cozy little house that was a wedding gift from Michael's parents. The house, with its quaint garden and white picket fence, seemed like a dream come true for Sarah. But living close to Evelyn meant she was a frequent visitor, and her visits were often filled with unsolicited advice and criticism that left Sarah feeling deflated. Sarah tried to make the house feel like a home, pouring her heart into decorating and adding personal touches. Yet Evelyn always found something to critique. One day, she walked into the kitchen while Sarah was preparing dinner. "You're using too much salt, dear. Michael likes his food lightly seasoned," she commented, her tone laced with disapproval. Sarah adjusted the seasoning without a word, feeling her efforts to please were constantly undermined. It wasn't just the cooking. Evelyn had an opinion on everything, from the way Sarah dressed to how she arranged the furniture. "Oh, honey, this couch should definitely go against that wall. It's all about optimizing the space," Evelyn would say, rearranging the living room while Sarah bit her tongue. Even her choice of curtains was met with a frown and a swift, "These are too dark for such a small room." We need to brighten the space up. Michael, for his part, seemed oblivious to the tension between his wife and his mother. When Sarah tried to express how belittled she felt, Michael would brush it off. "She's just trying to help, Sarah. You know how she is," he'd say, trying to smooth things over without addressing the issue. This dismissal made Sarah feel even more isolated, as if her feelings were less important than keeping peace with Evelyn. One evening, things reached a boiling point. Michael had brought home a promotion at work, and they invited Evelyn over to celebrate. During dinner, Evelyn dominated the conversation, barely letting Sarah get a word in. When Sarah finally spoke up about a project she was working on, Evelyn quickly diverted the conversation back to Michael's achievements. Later, as they sat in the living room, Evelyn made a pointed remark about Sarah's family, questioning their financial stability and contrasting it unfavorably with their own. That comment stung Sarah deeply, and she excused herself, retreating to the bedroom to hide her tears. It was one thing to criticize her cooking or decorating choices, but disparaging her family was too much. In the solitude of their room, the reality of her situation became painfully clear to Sarah. She was living in a beautiful prison, where every corner was scrutinized and her presence barely tolerated. She realized she needed to find her voice, not just for her own sake, but to protect her dignity from being eroded away by constant criticism. That night, as Sarah lay in bed waiting for Michael, she made a decision. She couldn't change Evelyn, but she could change how she responded to her. No longer would she allow herself to be. The crisp autumn air should have brought a sense of new beginnings, but for Sarah, it only underscored the chill in her marriage. The past few months had been a series of subtle battles, with Evelyn's constant criticisms turning the home she shared with Michael into a battleground without allies. The tipping point came unexpectedly during a family dinner intended to celebrate Michael's promotion at work. The house buzzed with the chatter of excited relatives and the clinking of glasses. Sarah had spent the entire day cooking and decorating, eager to make a good impression despite her reservations about Evelyn's likely comments. As guests started filling their plates, Evelyn took it upon herself to highlight what she considered flaws in front of everyone. "Oh, Sarah, this meat is just too dry. When I taught Michael to cook, he could make this dish in his sleep. Such a pity you can't seem to get it right," she said loud enough for everyone, including Michael, to hear. Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she caught the sympathetic glances from some family members and the smirks from others. Michael, who was usually the peacekeeper, simply shrugged and muttered, "Mom knows best about cooking, dear." His words, intended to lighten the mood, only deepened the cut. It was as if he had handed Evelyn the sword himself. The dinner dragged on, with Evelyn steering the conversation to recount tales of Michael's ex-girlfriends, each story subtly undermining Sarah and her relationship with him. "You know, Michael always had a taste for sophisticated women. It's funny how things change," Evelyn mused, sipping her wine with a sly smile. Sarah excused herself, feigning a headache, but instead of finding solace in the quiet of their bedroom, she felt the walls closing in on her. The laughter and music from downstairs seemed to mock her, and the portraits on the wall, showcasing Michael's life before her, reminded her of how she never quite fit into the picture. Lying on their bed, Sarah replayed the evening's humiliations. She realized this wasn't just about a mother-in-law's difficulty in letting go or accepting someone new. It was about respect, or rather, the lack of it, and how Michael's passive acceptance of his mother's behavior endorsed the continuous disrespect towards her. For hours, she lay there, listening to the fading sounds of departure, each goodbye a reminder of her isolation. When the house finally quieted down, Michael came into the room, his face flushed from the wine and the laughter, oblivious to Sarah's turmoil. Seeing him so carefree while she was breaking inside lit a spark of determination in her. That night, as Michael fell asleep beside her, Sarah lay awake, planning. She could no longer allow herself to be the victim of her own life. She needed to take a stand, not just for her dignity, but for the health of her marriage, if it was even salvageable. She decided that she would no longer be silent. She would confront Michael and Evelyn. But first, she needed proof of what she already suspected, that their disrespect was not just emotional, but possibly even legal betrayal. With a new day would come a new Sarah, one who fought back and reclaimed her life. The next morning would mark the beginning of her covered investigation into the financial discrepancies and secretive behavior she had noticed but ignored. Her marriage might have brought her into this battle, but she was determined to come out of it stronger and on her own terms. Sarah woke up the next morning feeling different. The sadness that had weighed on her heart for months was still there, but now it was mixed with something new: determination. She could no longer ignore the way she was being treated. Evelyn's constant insults, Michael's indifference, and the growing distance in her own home had reached a point where she had to act. But she knew that to truly stand up for herself, she needed more than just words. She needed proof. Over the past few months, she had noticed small things that didn't make sense. Michael often came home late, with vague excuses about work. Their savings, which she carefully monitored, seemed to be disappearing little by little. When she asked him about it, he would brush her off with a quick answer, telling her not to worry. But now, Sarah wasn't going to let it go. She started by going through the bank statements, something she had never done before without Michael sitting beside her. As she checked through the records, her heart pounded. Large amounts of money had been withdrawn, and some transactions had names she didn't recognize. She took notes, writing down dates and amounts, determined to figure out where their money was going. Her next step was to pay closer attention to Michael's phone calls. She didn't want to invade his privacy, but she couldn't ignore the way he always walked out of the room whenever he answered certain calls. One evening, when he left his phone on the table and stepped out for a moment, a message popped up on the screen. It was from an unknown number, and the words made her stomach twist. "Don't forget, we need the money by Friday." Sarah felt her hands shake. Who was asking Michael for money? And why was he hiding it from her? She wanted to confront him right away, but she knew she had to be careful. If she accused him without proof, he would just find a way to dismiss her concerns like he always did. No, she needed more. The next day, she decided to visit the bank. She spoke to a kind but firm bank officer and asked about the withdrawals. Though they couldn't share everything, she learned that Michael had taken out money from their joint account without telling her. Some of the withdrawals had even been made on days when he claimed to be at work late. Feeling her world crumble, Sarah realized something even more painful. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Michael had been lying to her, whether it was gambling, secret investments, or something worse. She had no idea. But one thing was clear: he didn't respect her enough to tell her the truth. That night, as she sat in bed pretending to read, she watched Michael out of the corner of her eye. He scrolled through his phone, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. She knew that soon she would have to face him. And when she did, she wouldn't just ask questions, she would demand the truth. This wasn't just about proving what was happening. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. No matter how painful it would be, Sarah was ready for the battle ahead. Sarah spent the next few days carefully gathering all the evidence she could. Every withdrawal, every suspicious message, and every strange expense was written down in her notebook. She felt a mix of anger and sadness, but most of all, she felt determined. She had spent too much time being ignored, humiliated, and treated like she didn't matter. That was going to change. One afternoon, while Michael was at work, Sarah visited a lawyer. She had never imagined she would need legal advice in her marriage, but now she needed to protect herself. The lawyer, a calm and professional woman, listened carefully as Sarah explained the situation. She asked questions about their finances, their home, and how money was being spent. After looking over the documents Sarah had brought, the lawyer sighed and leaned forward. "It looks like your husband has been making financial decisions without your knowledge. You have every right to question this. If this continues, you could find yourself in serious trouble, especially if he's borrowing money under both of your names." Sarah's heart sank. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed by a professional made it feel real. The lawyer gave her advice on how to proceed. You need to be careful. Don't let him know you're onto him just yet. Keep gathering evidence. And most importantly, protect any money that belongs to you. Walking out of the office, Sarah felt both relieved and overwhelmed. She had taken an important step, but the hardest part was still ahead: confronting Michael. That night, she sat across from him at the dinner table, watching him as he scrolled through his phone, barely paying attention to her. She wanted to ask him directly, but she knew he would just lie. So instead, she decided to test him. "I was thinking we should plan a vacation," she said, keeping her voice light. "Maybe somewhere nice, just the two of us." Michael barely looked up. "We'll see. Things are a little tight financially right now." Sarah felt her anger rise, but she controlled it. "Really? I checked our bank account. It seems like a lot of money has been spent recently." At that, Michael's eyes finally met hers. There was a flicker of something in his expression. Surprise, maybe even guilt, but it was gone in a second. He laughed. "Sarah, you're worrying too much. I handle everything. Trust me." But that was the problem. She had trusted him, and now she wasn't sure she even knew the man sitting across from her. That night, when Michael went to bed, Sarah stayed awake. She thought about everything. The way Evelyn had treated her, the way Michael had dismissed her feelings, and now, the secrets he was keeping from her. For so long, she had been patient. She had been understanding, but not anymore. She opened her notebook and flipped through the pages filled with notes, dates, and bank transactions. She wasn't just going to confront Michael. She was going to make sure that when she did, she had the upper hand. Tomorrow, she would start the next step in her plan. She would find out exactly where the money was going. And once she had all the answers, she would make sure that both Michael and Evelyn knew Sarah was no longer the woman they could push around. She was done waiting. It was time to take control. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a clear purpose. She was no longer the quiet, patient woman who tolerated disrespect. Today, she would take control of her life. She had gathered enough proof. Michael was lying, and he had been taking money without telling her. Now, it was time to find out exactly where it was going. After Michael left for work, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands resting on the notebook full of details she had collected. Her heart pounded, but she knew she couldn't back down now. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she had seen in the mysterious text message. A man answered. "Hello." Sarah took a deep breath. "I believe you've been in contact with my husband, Michael. He received a message about needing money by Friday." "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. There was silence for a moment, and then the man chuckled. "Oh, you must be his wife. He didn't tell you, did he? That's surprising." The man said in a smug tone, "He owes money, a lot of it. And if he doesn't pay up soon, things will get difficult." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. So, Michael was in debt. He had been taking money from their savings to cover it, all while acting like nothing was wrong. She thanked the man and hung up, her mind racing. This wasn't just about Evelyn's insults or Michael's dismissive attitude anymore. This was about betrayal. Sarah knew she couldn't wait any longer. That evening, as Michael walked through the door, she was ready. She stood in the living room, arms crossed, her notebook open on the coffee table. Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" he asked, shrugging off his jacket. Sarah didn't waste time. "Sit down," she said firmly. Something in her voice made him hesitate. He slowly lowered himself onto the couch. Sarah flipped through the pages of her notebook. "Tell me, Michael, how much do you owe?" she asked. Michael's face paled. "What are you talking about?" Sarah held up her phone. "I called the number. I know about the debt. I know about the money you've been taking from our savings." Michael opened his mouth, then closed it, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, I was going to tell you." "When?" When we lost everything, she interrupted. When I woke up one morning and realized you had spent all our money behind my back. Michael sighed and leaned forward, rubbing his temples. I didn't want to worry you. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Worry me? You humiliated me. You let your mother walk all over me while you were busy making secret deals and lying to me. Michael's expression hardened. It's not that simple, Sarah. Yes, it is, she shot back. You broke my trust. And now you're going to fix it. Michael looked up, confused. What do you mean? Sarah took a deep breath and met his eyes. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I know my rights. You're going to pay back every cent you took from our savings. And as for your mother, she is no longer welcome in this house unless she learns to respect me. Michael opened his mouth to argue, but Sarah held up a hand. No more excuses, no more lies. If you can't give me that, then I'd walk away. Michael stared at her, seeing a version of Sarah he had never seen before. She was no longer the woman who stood quietly in the background. She was strong, and she wasn't going to let him or Evelyn control her life anymore. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt powerful. No matter what happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She was finally taking her life back. Sarah had spent so much time feeling small, feeling like she wasn't important. But now, as she stood in front of Michael, watching his face shift between guilt and shock, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Michael sat in silence, his hands clasped together as he stared at the table. He had no excuse left, no quick words to smooth things over. Sarah had all the proof, and now she had made it clear. Things were going to change. Finally, he spoke. Sarah, I know I messed up, but I was just trying to fix things. I didn't want to involve you in all this. Sarah crossed her arms. You didn't want to involve me. We're supposed to be partners, Michael. But instead, you treated me like an outsider in my own home. He let out a deep sigh. I'll fix it. I'll pay back the money. Sarah shook her head. No, Michael. You will fix it, but not on your own terms. I already spoke to a lawyer, and I know my rights. I'm taking control of our finances from now on. No more secrets. No more reckless spending. Michael frowned. You're making it sound like I can't be trusted. Sarah let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. Michael, can you be trusted? She asked. He looked away, unable to answer. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Sarah already knew who it was before she even opened it. Evelyn walked in, her usual confident posture unchanged. I heard about this nonsense, she said, looking straight at Sarah. You're trying to control my son. That's not going to happen. Sarah had expected this. She had spent too long letting Evelyn walk all over her, and now that she was fighting back, she knew Evelyn wouldn't go down without a fight. I'm not controlling him, Sarah said calmly. I'm taking back what's mine. I have spent months being treated like I don't matter, but I do matter. And if you can't respect me, then you are no longer welcome in my home. Evelyn's eyes widened. She had never expected Sarah to talk back to her like this. Michael, are you really going to let her speak to me this way? Michael looked between them, clearly torn. But Sarah already knew the answer. He had always chosen his mother over her, and that wasn't going to change. Sarah took a deep breath. You know what? I don't need your approval, Evelyn. And I don't need Michael to fight for me anymore. I can fight for myself. With that, she picked up the envelope on the table, the one with all the legal papers she had prepared just in case. She had given Michael a choice, but deep down, she already knew what she had to do. Evelyn scoffed. You won't last a day without my son. Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Watch me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. And Sarah was finally ready to take it.